And good evening, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin, and welcome to my channel. It's called McDuff Lives. And tonight we've invited back, and he's graciously accepted, David Shavin, or Shavin, as you prefer. David is a is a violinist as well as an editor with EIR for a number of years, and we had a great conversation last week. So we decided to carry it on tonight and get into one of David's favorite subjects, which is Mozart, and how Mozart and the American Revolution are actually intimately connected. And this comes out of an essay that David wrote, and you can read that essay on EIR at larouchepub.com. But David, welcome back to the show. It's good to have you back. How are you tonight?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm glad you're here. I wanted to do something kind of fun tonight just to start off, and I hope you'll indulge me. Last week, you asked me if I was going to sing some of Osmond, the heavy guy, the Pasha's major domo at
John, that was my condition upon my coming back, was to make sure you sang this.
Well, well, I haven't sang much in a couple of years, but I'll tell you what, I love this aria. So let's just see if I can't get the orchestra started here. Where's my?
Do I have to play violin for you?
Not tonight. No, we're gonna give you the night off. I'll do all the work, and let's see how this thing goes here. All right, Osmond's going to be hanging a couple of scurvy people, Belmont and Costanza, if he gets his wish. Wie will ich triumphieren, wenn sie euch mich verführen? Und die Hälfte schnurren so, schnurren so. Und die Hälfte schnurren so, schnurren so. Schnurren so. Und die Hälfte schnurren so, schnurren so. Hüpfen will ich, lachen, springen und ein Freudenliedchen singen, denn nun hab ich neues Ruhe. Denn nun hab ich vor euch Ruhe. Wie will ich triumphieren, wenn sie euch zum Mozart führen, und die Hälse führen zu, und die Hälse schnurren zu. Unser Horn entdeckt ich schon, und dann wird es schon und klingen, und sie tun schon und stingen, und er hasset euren Lohn, und er hasset euren Lohn. Schleicht nur säuberlich und leise, ihr verdammten Harrensmäuser, unser Horn entdeckt euch schon, entdeckt euch schon, entdeckt euch schon. Oh, wie will ich triumphieren, wenn sie euch für mich erführen, und die Hälse schnurren so, und die Hälse schnurren so. Hüpfen will ich, lachen, swinging und ein Freudenliedchen singen. Nun hab ich's Ruhe vor euch, nun hab ich's Ruhe vor euch. Wie will ich's triumphieren, wenn sie euch zum Mozart führen, und die Hälse schnurren so, schnurren so. Schnurren so. Und die Hälse schnurren so, und die Hälse schnurren so, schnurren so. On the hills are snoring so, on the hills are snoring snow, on the hills are snoring so, snoring snow, snoring so. Oh boy.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your
Sounds like
indulgence.
you want to execute some nice Christians.
Yeah, well, they bother me. I hate those, Christians. They can hang around and they steal all the women, and God, I can't stand them. Yeah. So anyway, that was Osmin's aria. Osmin. That is one of the biggest roles of basses for all of classical opera. It's huge, and I've never sang it. I just have worked up the aria from time to time, and that was fun. So thanks for letting me do that as kind of an introduction to the abduction from the Seraglio, which is Mozart's. Well, I'm going to let you tell the folks about the inspiration, why he wrote this what's called a Singspiel, and what is a Singspiel, and why did Mozart do that instead of carrying on with the highfalutin upper class opera tradition of the Italian opera? And let me go. And I think I want to change my shirt. Actually, I've been working kind of hard. All right, over to you, David.
Well, thank you, John, I for honoring my request. Most people shy away from a couple of those low notes, but you got them. So that's part of the opera where people are realizing the horror that these 4 Christians who've been captured by these Muslims, the horror builds up, and Osmin plays a key role on that. But the point, to put it a little bit too simply, as the Americans turned the world upside down on the British Empire at Yorktown in 1781, Mozart brought the American Revolution to the biggest empire in Europe, causing massive excitement, happiness, and a lot of protest over this opera in the process. And he did it in tight coordination with the head of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Emperor Joseph II. And what he did with this opera, it was in part of Emperor Joseph's project to end serfdom. He wiped out serfdom in 1781. He had projects to build a middle class in Europe and to end colonial and religious wars. So this issue of the empire's identity as being the fighting religious wars, Christians against Muslims, was being hyped up by the enemies of the American Revolution. They wanted the courts of Europe to fall back into old habits when there's something beautiful and new on the table, which is the possibility of the American Revolution inspiring countries in Europe to end feudalism. And there was going to be a big celebration in 1783, a 100-year centennial when the Austrians' proudest moment of defending Christendom by a big victory over the Turks in 1683. And this libretto, this story, well, it originally ends that, let me back up on that. The Emperor Joseph II had been emperor with his mother, Maria Theresa, the co-emperor and empress, for about 16 years. And she passed away in 1780, and he was no longer co-emperor. He had said early on, if it's just on your matter of the Singspiel, he had told his mother 16 years earlier, when he became when he succeeded his father and became emperor, he wrote his mother, "All men are equal from birth. We inherit only animal life from our parents. And in that there is not the slightest difference between king, count, burgher, and peasant. I believe that no divine or natural law opposes this equality." This is 1765. It's 11 years before the Declaration of Independence. So there are 16 years of tension between how the emperor was going to run, but that was over in 1781. Joseph now could have his way. 5 years earlier, in 1776, he visited with the dramatist Gottfried Lessing. He had a project to build a national theater a national theater meaning in German, something that the general population could come to and understand in their language. There was Italian opera. It's beautiful. It's beautiful, but that was for the court. It's for the aristocrats who knew several languages and prided themselves on Italian. A national theater was a project to uplift the hearts and minds of the population. There was a theater for the Germans before them, but it was very low level. It's like soap operas. Can you imagine people watching soap operas all day long? Well, I guess we do that now. Some version of soap operas. It's in the news. It's very hard to really develop your concentration span and your emotional maturity watching that. So Leslie had a funny comment after Joseph came and talked to him about his plan was to set up a national theater with Singspiel, singing in German, telling a story and combining German language with singing, which German presents more difficulties than Italian or other language that may be more euphonious. Was that?
It doesn't sound like a natural, does it? German and singing.
It doesn't flow as easily, but it was accomplished, and it raised the possibility of combining language and music to even a higher level.
Yeah.
Not to denigrate either one, they're just different. And Lessing had a funny comment. He said Joseph II's quote, kind-hearted idea of providing the Germans with a national theater. It's quite amazing since we Germans are not even a nation. And the point was they were going to build a nation based upon building the theater, the culture first. So the Mozart was already doing some Singspiel German projects, famously in 1777, the next year, in Mannheim, Germany. The man who was running the theater there, Baron Otto von Gemmingen, had a very particular Freemasonic lodge, which Mozart later joined with. I'll just say right now, the two lodges that are involved here, Gemmingen's Lodge and another one called Zur wahren Eintracht, the True Harmony, were different from all the other Freemasonic groupings. They weren't. They didn't like secrecy. They didn't like mysticism. They didn't like secret handshakes, and they didn't think they had to run around behind the scenes against, they thought it's time to, with the American Revolution, to come out publicly for getting kings and queens and empires to abandon, tax farming serfs and using slavery, and instead build up a middle class. And in 1781, that's what Joseph II did. I think it was actually the same day as the victory over the British at Yorktown, October 19th, a bit of a coincidence, but because they didn't know about the victory yet in Europe. But it was in October, I think October 19th, Joseph II freed the serfs, broke up the landed nobility's estates, allowed Jews and Protestants to have the same rights that Catholics had, which is a big thing in a Catholic empire. This is the Holy Roman, Empire. Because the values he was putting on the table, that the positive values that were still in, that might be in Christianity, was something that could be universalized, and the American Revolution was key to doing that. So just to go through the chronology of this thing, Mozart does get to Vienna in 1781, and this opera is his real first big task. How does he get connected? He's 24, I believe. How is he being appointed this intervention that the emperor is going to make upon his population? I don't know the whole story, to be honest with you, but Mozart, he's at the age of about 20. He's gone to Mannheim. This is a theater that it will be important later on in the story because involving Friedrich Schiller. He's on his way to Paris. In 1778, Mozart is in Paris, and he's offered the job of the court organist for Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. And Marie Antoinette is the sister of Joseph II in Vienna. There's shenanigans that push him out of Vienna, that push him out of Paris, to make sure he doesn't get. Paris would have been different. The history of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette could have been radically different, except for this intervention to push Mozart out. However, Mozart the reason he was being offered that job, he met with the grandfather of Adrien Lafayette. The grandfather of Adrien Lafayette was it's the Danoué family. The family who they pushed the French into joining with the American Revolution. There was a faction fight in France. Mozart was in France right at the point that France finally, in the spring of 1778, officially agreed to join. And the Danoué family, were the two brothers, were instrumental in working with Benjamin Franklin and getting that alliance put together. They invite Mozart out to their estate for about a 10-day period, where he's having discussions out there with actually a son of Johann Sebastian Bach, who traveled down from London, even though war has just been officially declared between Britain and France. So it's a very interesting meeting. There's not much known about it, but it's certainly part of Danoué had the type of influence around the court that he would have wanted Mozart appointed in that position. So he gets pushed out. He's back in Salzburg. There's a very backward fellow named powerful fellow named the Archbishop Colloredo, who pretty much runs Salzburg. He's a prince of the empire, and he's the archbishop located in Salzburg. And he's been there are letters back and forth between Mozart and his father about their, what they had to do to be employees of the archbishop. And in 1781, the archbishop makes a trip to Vienna. He goes there regularly. He's a big shot, and Mozart's along on the trip. And this is the famous trip where Mozart's now meeting up with a whole different type of aristocrat, and he basically sees his chance to escape. And he's being told you can't be having these meetings with these other aristocrats in Vienna who want to talk to him. I'll go through who they are. And the archbishop sends down orders through his factotum, a guy named Count Darco. And this is the famous Count Darco who, as Mozart puts it, kicks him in the arse and says, "Don't look back on your way out," when they fire Mozart. And Mozart has no employment officially. But what happens, there's a group around the Emperor Joseph II, headed up by the court chancellor. His last name is Cobenzl. Mozart's first student he gets in 1781 to start getting funds, employment, is the cousin of the court chancellor Cobenzl, a woman named Countess de Rumbicki. He's invited out the Cobenzl estate that summer of 1781. The issue, even before the Americans have beat the British, is already being entertained in the court about whether or not they're going to go for ending feudalism and building a middle class. And as part of that, they're assigning Mozart this opera to compose for the occasion of the visit of the Grand Duke Paul of Russia. Grand Duke Paul of Russia is a problem. It's been a problem for, he's part of a faction that basically wants to base their empire upon having continual Christianity versus Islam, continual warfare. And they're trying to inveigle Joseph II into going to war against the Turks. Now, it's a little bit why we're getting to the story and why they're planning for Mozart to write a very different reception for the Grand Duke Paul, have a whole different discussion go on. And the Grand Duke Paul, just to stretch that, just give you the two sides here. Joseph II, the court chancellor, Cobenzl, and a whole host of other people want to push what we call a Republican policy. On the other side, there's a jerk named Duke Karl Eugen. He's in Württemberg. Stuttgart is the famous city there. Friedrich Schiller is a young man there in Stuttgart at the time. The Duke Karl Eugen has got one of his daughters married to Grand Duke Paul. She's now the Empress. She's going to be the Empress of Russia. She's married to the Grand Duke. He's the son of Catherine the Great, who's presently the Empress at that time. and Carl Count, what is his name? Eugen, Carl Eugen, is manipulating in Vienna. He's also traveling to Vienna because he's trying to get his other daughter married off to what becomes Franz II, Emperor Franz II. He's the man who's going to succeed Joseph. Joseph II has no children. His wife had died young and without children, so the empire is going to go after him to his brother Leopold II, and Leopold, his first son, is this Francis II, and so the shenanigans are involved. So you're going to have basically Eugen, I'll just call him. They're going to have an alliance, a feudal alliance, anti-American Revolution alliance of Grand Duke Paul from Russia to succeed there, and Franz II to succeed, and it's going to be cemented by both of his daughters. She does end up marrying, and she does become the empress. And from 1792, for the next 50 years, Franz II is the prototypical reactionary Austrian emperor. I actually wasn't going to go into this thing, but just to give you an idea of this guy, one of Mozart's close Masonic friends, whose name I'm forgetting right now, was he was famous as an African-American chess player. He was part of Mozart's lodge. When he passed away, Franz II, the emperor, had his body stuffed and put in a museum on display. It says a lot about what their policies were. They didn't like this guy, and they. So to get back to the happier part of the story, in the summer of 1781, Mozart's only been there for a couple of months, and they've assigned this. The Abduction from the Seraglio is the name of the opera that you just heard a passage from. Just to get to the punchline, Mozart, the opera ends. These four white Christians from Europe have been captured in North Africa, and Osmin is threatening to, he's overjoyed about that he's going to get to execute these guys, and the whole opera builds up to this. You don't see the boss, the Pasha. He's supposed to be even more evil, you assume, than Osmin. And when they finally confront the Pasha, the original libretto basically has this Deus ex machina, this little gimmick, where you find out at the last second that they're saved. The four Christians are saved because Belmonte, the head guy of the four Christians, turns out to they find out that he's the long lost son of the Pasha. So everything's okay. The opera's supposed to end happy. Everybody goes home happy. But, it's just this gimmick. Mozart threw that out. He as he said, the whole plot is being turned upside down and at my instigation. Actually, the original librettist tried to sue him, threatened to sue him for changing the ending. How did he change the ending? I'll hold that off for 1 second. This Duke Karl Eugen, who's come into Vienna, he's famous at the time for having arrested 5 years early. He's had in prison for 5 years the most pro-American activist in Germany, a fellow named Christian Schubart. John, you may know him because he's actually the poet who composed poems, and one of the famous ones was called Die Forelle, the trout. It's the one that Schubert set to music. Quintet. Yeah. And it's a very simple story. about
Yeah.
in the third stanza, it's just the guy looking to fishing for the trout. It's clear water. The trout can see the fisherman. He can avoid, he avoids the fisherman's little wiles and doesn't get caught. And then the fisherman has to muddy the water so that the trout doesn't see, what he's up to. And then the trout gets caught. And everybody understood, every Republican in Europe, including Schubert and Beethoven and others, they all knew this was a simple little story about how the oligarchy works, how they catch you by muddying the water. And Duke Karl Eugen also knew this about Schubert. He was actually officially arrested and put in jail because he was publishing a newspaper covering the news about the American revolutionaries. This was the main source in Germany to find out about the progress of the American Revolution. And he upset Karl Eugen and others because he included in this stuff the dirty deals being made to ship Hessians, the British paying German princes to ship German mercenaries, the famous Hessians people hear about fighting against the American Revolution. So this guy raised a stink about it. And so Karl Duke Eugen had this guy in jail for 5 years. During this period, Friedrich Schiller is visiting Schubert in prison. He's a 20-year-old, and he's going to this political prisoner and he writes his plays to follow up on Schubert's works, including a play on the selling of the mercenaries, the evil involved in German princes selling German. So they won't back off on this thing. And in fact, I'm getting a little bit ahead, but you're going to find out that Mozart's linked to the emperor, the guy working with him on the opera, and Friedrich Schiller are both arrested on the same day, a couple of weeks before the opera is to open. So and what got my interest on this opera originally was I wrote the story decades ago, at least 30 years ago, and I had no idea that musicians were political. I didn't know that people would fight over operas. And there was just riots over Mozart's changing of the ending of the opera. So now I can get back to what he did. His ending, that he says, Belmonte, in confronting the Pasha, Selim, says, he's trying to save the other three. He says, cool your wrath on me. Avenge the wrong done to you by my father. I'm sorry, I skipped one part. What the Pasha has said right before that is, nothing about you're my long lost son. The Pasha says that Belmonte's father, it was because of your father, that barbarian, that I was forced to leave my native land. His insatiable greed deprived me of my beloved, whom I cherish more than my own life. He robbed me of my honor, property, everything. He destroyed all my happiness. So all of the attention built up by Osman and others about the evil situation that these 4 Christians are in, it gets exacerbated to the extreme. They find out that the Pasha has, Belmonte happens to be the son of his worst enemy, the man who's tried to destroy his life. Belmonte says, cool your wrath on me. Avenge the wrong done to you by my father. Your anger is justified, and I am prepared for anything. So in the audience, they're prepared for the worst from this barbarian Turk who has now extra. The Pasha then says, it must be very natural for your family to do wrong, since you assume that I am the same way. But you deceive yourself. I despise your father far too much ever to behave as he did. Have your freedom. Take Constanza, she's his love interest, who's there, one of the 4. Sail home and tell your father that you are in my power, that I set you free. So that you can tell him it is a far greater pleasure to repay injustice with good deeds than evil with evil. Belmonte says, my lord, you astonish me. The Pasha says, I can believe that. Now go. And if you become at least more humane than your father, my action will be rewarded. So Mozart didn't just write the music, he rewrote the libretto. The original librettist threatened to sue him on this thing. Later, when everything became famous, this opera was performed more than any other opera, I think, in Mozart's lifetime. It's like 40 different German cities performed this thing in the next 9 years before Mozart died. The librettist, a year or two later, he changed his mind and said, "Well, there's not much of a change. I didn't really threaten to sue him. It's pretty much my opera." So it was a massive success. So let's back up a bit. The story is between. Should I stop any questions right now, John? Or
Well,
the next part's the story, the details between of the composition of it.
well, thanks for explaining all that. I think in general terms, what interests us now today about this opera is, did it have a political impact? And if so, in what direction? We have you've got the aristocracy, but you've got this emperor in Vienna, the Holy Roman Emperor, and I guess the Austro-Hungarian Emperor at that point, Joseph II, who is he's a divine right type of guy, I think, but he's also trying to do the right thing. And to do the right thing means to be liberal in terms of opening doors that were closed to common people. And that means the opera becomes a kind of a metaphor for opening society, so that you say, well, no, you don't have to go to school and study and learn Italian in order to appreciate good music. We're going to write it for the common people. We're going to use the common language of the people, and that in Austria at the time, of course, is German. That was a invitation to the common people to grab power, to say, you know, we are the people. We want rights. We want our rights. You know, and to invite those people is very, very threatening to the established aristocracy, because as far as I have learned, there's nothing they hate more than crowds of poor people coming up to their castle and saying, "Hey, we're not happy." So the invitation to broaden the opera, plus the obvious fun of it, that they put in a lot of comical stuff and comical characters, so that I can just imagine the people of Germany or of Austria at the time, I guess, feeling relieved, feeling like, wow, this is great. Finally, we understand why they go to the opera, and now we can be part of it too. And it was fun, and it was an extremely successful financially, if I recall. That's one of the things that changes everybody's minds. As you said, the librettist was ready to sue when they first published it, but then 2 years later, after they made all that money, it's like, oh, yes, I can get along with it just fine, you know. But the idea that people in Vienna were commonly looking across the ocean to see what's going on in America. Are these people going to get free of Great Britain or not? You know, we don't think of that. It's a perspective that, you know, does a European perspective on the American Revolution really kind of in our education system doesn't exist. It's just either the way we look at it or the way George III looked at it. And sure, we hear about the Hessians, and we kind of think, oh, but what a terrible thing to do, to just take all of these soldiers and rent them out to the British so that they could go over to America and get killed by George Washington. Of course, most of them didn't get killed, and a whole lot of them live right around here where I live, down here in Southern Maryland. We've got so many people named Hess and whatnot. That's where that comes from, that name Hess. The old soldiers. So the democratization of society is the movement that is the American Revolution, and to kind of just pull together what I'm hearing from you is that Mozart himself was a proponent of the American Revolution, and Mozart and Lafayette and they're in the same camp, whereas the British royals, of course, and George III de Hanover, that is the enemy. That's the aristocracy, or the oligarchic aristocracy at that point, because we of course already have had the glorious revolution, and the Hanoverians have been been on the British throne for quite a long time, but I'm rambling now. I got it's hard to wrap your arms around all this stuff and put it together in a neat, tie a bow on it and say, here's the story. But I think we're doing pretty good.
I think so. I'll start with the simpler things because I get into too much, but the simple answer is, it had a dramatic effect. It wasn't just that people could get some. They had German theater before the court established a national theater. It's a question of what the leaders of the land sending a message out that they want their population to be in a much higher culture than the soap opera stuff, the little episodes of domestic scenes, and to get them thinking of. So anyhow, the effect was Joseph II actually they stopped the war that they were pushing, that part of the court was pushing on him. It was important that he did not fall into that war because they needed a chance to get these reforms to work. These reforms are large. So if you're going to break up serfdom, it's not just a matter of giving serfs freedom. It's a matter of having the landowners want to develop their land and employ, having education, some levels of education, so people are more skilled, they can solve problems, they can deal with machinery. Metallurgy was a big thing being pushed. In fact, Joseph II gave one of the biggest. Mozart wrote a cantata on the occasion of Joseph II giving a national award to Ignaz von Born, the model for Zoroaster, the living model for Zoroaster. I'll go into some of who these people are. For his work on metallurgy, which is going to improve all the mining development. So farming, mining, the application. Benjamin Franklin wrote a note to Joseph II that he's got, that he should, this thing about Ignaz von Born, he should be celebrated in Austro-Hungarian Empire. He should be raised up with a big award. This is very conscious stuff. It's not about just handing people their freedom. It's a matter of believing. Joseph II was not resigning as emperor. It's a matter of deciding that your empire is going to be better off if you have better educated and skilled people, and you can't run forever and a day on serfs, on backward labor. That's not going to work. So what happened was, there's three main groupings Mozart's working with from the summer of 1781 until summer of 1782 when the opera does premiere. There's a big fight. They don't let the opera be performed. On the Grand Duke Paul's scheduled visit, he was going to visit September 15th of 1781. The British had not been defeated as yet. There's still too much opposition to the emperor himself from the Archbishop Colorado and others, their faction, the medieval faction, and it doesn't stop Mozart from changing the ending. It's just the emperor has a fellow named Johann Gunther, his right-hand man, the man who spends more time with the emperor than anybody, be the man who's working with Mozart on developing the opera. By the way, he's the one who gets arrested a couple of weeks before the opera is finally put on stage. In that year, Mozart is working with three main groupings. One of them is a musical grouping led by Baron von Swieten. Baron von Swieten is a big proponent of Johann Sebastian Bach in Vienna. He had been the ambassador to the Prussian court and collected a lot of Bach's music, and the reason we have a lot of it today is because of Baron von Swieten. He ran a salon, a Sunday midday salon, which Mozart attended. Baron von Swieten's position at the court, he was president of the court commission on education. And this is now a big deal because they're going to educate a lot of people. There's also a massive outbreak of publishing of newspapers for the general population. They're just engaging them in these things. The court censorship is not there anymore, not in any way like it was before. Baron von Swieten is working with a very important fellow named Joseph von Sonnenfels. Joseph von Sonnenfels, Mozart has his collective writings. Sonnenfels is the guy who wrote most of the October 19th reforms for the emperor. So he's meeting with Mozart every Sunday at Baron von Swieten's. Sonnenfels had, for the next 10 years, he's the key guy who he tries to stop the usury and save the thrift institutions like our savings and loans. He dismantles the secret police. He was famous at the time because a year or two before Mozart got to Vienna, he had been given what the oligarchy thought was a simple matter of being a technical guy, a smart guy. He was supposed to codify the laws of the empire, and he ended up throwing out all the feudal laws, just saying, "Yeah, I'm for all codifying this stuff, but you codify things, it has to be under some natural law connection." And there's just a lot of laws that don't make any sense. They didn't go for his quick reform, but he was the type of guy that was very serious in principle, but also had no profound respect for the oligarchy, maintaining things. A second major group, the last person I'll mention in Baron von Sweeten's group, Anton von Spielmann, the court chancellor in charge of foreign policy. He knew everything about the Grand Duke Paul's visits and all the background stuff that was going on. Second group, Countess Thun. Countess Thun is famous in history for being the woman who introduced Beethoven, the 16-year-old Beethoven, to Mozart when Beethoven made a visit in and arranged for Mozart to hear the talented young 16-year-old. Mozart was dead when Beethoven arrived in Vienna as an adult. But this is the one meeting they had, and Countess Thun arranged that. But she ran a regular salon. As the abduction for the Seraglio is being worked out over the course of this year, every act is being acted out at her salon. Joseph II, the emperor, attends this salon occasionally. Prince Kaunitz, the chancellor, I think attends this thing regularly. Gamingen, the Baron Gamingen, the man who in Mannheim is doing the Singspiel and ends up working with Schiller. That's just like Schiller gets. Well, I'll hold that off. He's in this salon. Georg Forster, a big proponent of the American Revolution, translated a big work for the Germans on Lafayette. He's the man who popularized Benjamin Franklin to the Europeans under the title of Götterfunken, the divine sparks of his mastering of electricity, Götterfunken. And that finds itself in Schiller's, in the Ninth Symphony, the Götterfunken. Georg Forster is this fellow. He had traveled around the world earlier with Captain Cook on a circumnavigation, was the scientist on board. But he describes this salon of what was happening, where these abduction from the Seraglio acts are being read out, and he's seeing the emperor listen to this and seeing the discussion. He says, quote, "Everything I experienced there now seems like a wonderful dream. Is it really true that I live there among human beings? I mean the kind of human beings about whom Nathan the Wise says it is enough for them to be human," meaning a mensch. Nathan the Wise was the play by Lessing, Gottfried Lessing, in 1777. That was his dramatic and overturning of expectations. It's what Mozart modeled his overturning of his opera, of the abduction from the Seraglio. This is where we don't have time to go through that, but an Arab, a Jew, and a Christian get over, walk into a bar. Yeah. And people should go read it, Nathan the Wise. It's very interesting how you can celebrate the strengths of all three cultures and religions and find a higher unity among the three. And I'll advertise that tomorrow at 10 o'clock, there's going to be a show on Afghanistan, which will go more into this. And people should get happy about that. So Forster and Nathan the Wise was read also at this salon, that play. And I guess I should say right now, Mozart was living the time that he's writing the opera with a Jewish family called the Arnstein family. The Arnstein family had copies of Nathan the Wise for sure. And Nathan the Wise was modeled, Lessing modeled Nathan the Wise on his good friend, lifelong friend, Moses Mendelssohn. Yes, he's the grandfather of Felix Mendelssohn. But Moses Mendelssohn was doing something radical in the Jewish community. He was saying you had got to read the Jewish Bible, the Old Testament, in Hebrew and German both. And you had Jews saying, this is sacrilege. You don't translate it into German. But it's like the National Theater. It was a matter of getting Jews opened up to being a positive force in their own society, in the German society in Berlin. Without going into more of that, Moses Mendelssohn's work called Theodon on the immortality of the soul was given to Mozart by the Arnstein, Fanny Arnstein, and the family is the key grouping in. And so he's being introduced that year to both Lessing's Nathan the Wise and the model for Nathan the Wise, Moses Mendelssohn, and the way Moses Mendelssohn thought. And you just have to take my word for it right now that Nathan the Wise had a dramatic overturning of what people's expectations, the way that part I read to you about the abduction from the Seraglio. So the third and last group that's important to Mozart in this year is what the man I mentioned, Ignaz von Born, the model for Zoroaster, a scientist. He sets up his own invasion of the Masonic groupings. There's a lot of Masonic groupings, and I'm not saying they're all bad. They're not, but they just waste a lot of time with buku secrets and a night out on the town. And he sets up something called Der wahren Eintracht, the True Harmony. And he has two publications. One is to basically publicly make public all the Masonic secrets and explain the he goes in like Isis and Osiris. He'll go into, what made sense about that and what was not cultish about it. And so he has one publication going into explaining what's really scientific about the Masonic heroes, and he demythologizes it. He takes all the buku secrets away from that. And he said Forster, the same guy, was also attending some of these meetings when he was in Vienna, and he has another nice quote. He says, "What about these meetings? They make light of the whole idea of secrecy. They've transformed the entire thing into a society of rational, unprejudiced men dedicated to enlightenment." There's more I can say about that. But so those are the three main groups that Mozart is entered into, and they're commingling between forward-thinking Catholics, forward-thinking Freemasons, people around the court. So what happens on June 27th, 1782, Mozart is having dinner with Johann Valentin Gunther. It's a couple of weeks before the opening of the opera. Everything's fine. And the next morning, Gunther is arrested and jailed, the emperor's right-hand man. That same day, over in Stuttgart, Duke Karl Eugen has Schiller arrested. I should say Schiller's arrested because he disobeyed orders and went to Mannheim to work with Gemingen, the guy running the German language theater there, and because they're putting on Schiller's play, including his play on the Hessians, Duke Karl Eugen won't have any of this thing. He's already sort of banned. He's made Karl Schubart, the poet, an example. He's in prison, and lo and behold, somebody a young man looking up to Schubart is now writing plays on this stuff, and he's going out of town to get them staged. I should mention one last fellow. Cobenzl, who's not one of these, is also around these three groups. The guy that originally introduced Mozart to the court. He is in touch with Mozart the whole springtime about the pressure on the emperor. The Pope has come into town. This is not one of the good popes. He's come into town because they're all concerned. The European heads of state and the Pope are all concerned that Joseph II is going American on them. And the Pope has come in there to make sure that Joseph II doesn't betray the cause of the oligarchy. And Cobenzl is briefing Mozart about the day-to-day fights that are going on. So it's not a little connection between Mozart and his opera and the fight going on around the court. So these two arrests occurred on June 28th. The premiere goes on. I'll explain that in a second, but the premiere does go ahead on July the 16th. This is the emperor's opera. He's commanded it. You wonder why the emperor's allowed his right-hand man to be arrested. But at the premiere, Mozart writes, there's hissing going on before the opera even starts. They don't care, the play is still successful. So you got these agents there hissing and trying to interrupt the opera, and you have the opera winning the hearts and minds of the population. Mozart wrote to his father, quote, "The cabal against it," he's writing on the second night, when it's even more successful. He says, "The cabal against it was even stronger than on the first night. The whole of the first act was hissed. But still, they could not prevent the loud shouts of bravo, bravo during the arias. The second performance was sold out. The third was even more crowded." Mozart writes, "People are absolutely crazy about this opera." He tells his father, "All the gossiping, all the rumors, all the backstabbing against him are to no avail. Quote, your son's work is making such a sensation in Vienna that people refuse to hear anything else, and the theater is always packed." So the population does get won over to Joseph II, stopping all going back to normal, religious wars. There's no, for the next, from 1781 to 1785, for 4 years, it ain't great, but the Joseph is trying to push ahead his reforms, and he's got the upper hand more or less. The only big problem is, Archbishop Colloredo has got an employee of his, Count Herberstein, and Mozart writes about this to his father. The Count Herberstein is the guy who whispered evil things and demanded that Gunther be arrested. And the arrest of Gunther broke the personal connection that would have existed otherwise between the emperor and Mozart. After this opera, there was no personal connection. Mozart wrote several other operas on benefit of on the emperor's plans, but they were all done without this close coordination of the first year in Vienna. That's a whole nother story, the Marriage of Figaro and the Don Giovanni. Very similar situations. It's a whole nother story I won't go into now, but never was there such close coordination. Mozart had to do things like Lyndon LaRouche. He had to sort of throw these ideas over the wall. LaRouche met with Reagan on the SDI, and there was but their attacks against LaRouche made sure that Reagan could never have that type of close guidance and leadership, and had to do things at arm's distance. And it's colored the last 30, 40 years of U.S. history, and it certainly colored this situation. So you had Joseph did buy some time. He was a tremendous cultural success. One last thing: what he was charged with, there was a whispering campaign, was that these Prussian Jews, that Gunther was now a Prussian spy. Why? Because of these Jews of Berlin. What does that mean? Moses Mendelssohn's trying to educate Jews in Berlin was part of the project that Joseph II was going to do for Protestants and Jews in Vienna, that Jews could have their own schools, but they had to learn German, the language of the court. It couldn't just be their own little enclave off to themselves. They had to agree they want to contribute to the civil society. And Moses Mendelssohn, he was the core of that project, and it was his material. So Fanny Arnstein, a friend of hers named Eleonora Aeschylus, who is the mistress of Sonnenfels, were involved in these projects to get high quality material in Hebrew and German, and to the Jewish population as part of that education policy. So he was being charged. Gunther was being arrested for being a Prussian spy, and there were problems between Austria and Prussia. But they used this thing. He wasn't spying about anything. He was part of the project the emperor was running to have Jews and Protestants educated, and so this we only get the story on this thing because after Joseph II died in 1790, in 1791, Sonnenfels is one of the key people who, in fighting against the secret police, the man who I think murdered Mozart, I'll mention him in a second, but had him fired. There was a brief period where the head of the secret police, his name is Count Pergen, Pergen, and he got fired in 1791, and the files were dug into, and they found this story. Eleanor Aeschylus, who had been banned from Vienna, was cleared. Her name was cleared. Sonnenfels' name was cleared. Gunther's name was cleared. But for modern history, people should note the John Birch Society And this whole thing about the Freemasonic conspiracy. What happened in 1797, 1798 in the United States, when it was before, as the United States, as George Washington and Hamilton and these other people were being, the game among the British Empire was to rip apart the American experiment by having us choose between, you can join the British Empire, you can join the French revolutionaries. That's it. Those are your two choices, left or right. Right or left, I guess I'd call it. And what was inserted into that was a work by John Robeson, Proofs of the Conspiracy, which was that on this side of it, if you went with republicanism, you were part of a demonic conspiracy. I don't know if people have seen John Robeson's Proof of a Conspiracy, but it was well circulated in the 50s and 60s by the John Birch Society, and it still had its damage done. But it was basically, it came from Count Peregrine, the guy who wrote a report. One of his reports was, all the Freemasonic groups are useful idiots. We don't have any problem with them. It's the Zoroaster one, the Ignaz von Born one. They were formed in 1776, and they're like the Illuminati, and their whole project is the American Revolution, and every court in Europe has got to slam down on those guys. So those two Masonic groups, the Ignaz von Borns and the one that Mozart is part of, were the only ones that you had to Count Peregrine, and that's why people investigate Mozart's early demise. They got to look into Peregrine's operations against his spying on Mozart and the operations he was running against him. That's a whole longer story. So that's what I was trying to say about the year 1781-82. It had a massive effect on helping, I guess I should say, unfortunately, after Joseph II lost ground, by 1786 and 1787, the usury took over, the old financial oligarchs took over, the building of the middle class got aborted, the Austro-Turkish War went ahead in 1787. The emperor led the fight, and they had massive. More Austrians were killed by cholera and disease than anything else, and the emperor really never recovered his health. He died prematurely in the experience. So from 1787 to 1790, I have nothing good to say about what the emperor was involved in. He was crushed.
So Joseph II was still in power when Mozart was killed?
No. Good question. He died. The emperor dies in March of 1790. Mozart dies December 5th, 1791. By the way, the exact same day that Alexander Hamilton presented his report on manufactures to Congress. A very bittersweet day. The operation to get rid of the situation in Europe really goes down from the summer of 1791 onwards. Leopold II takes over from Joseph II in March of 1790. I'm not saying he's the greatest and smartest guy in the world, but he felt that his brother got screwed, excuse my language, by Count Peregrine and the secret police, and he gave permission to have had these files unearthed. And when they were unearthed, they dumped Count Peregrine from the secret police, and there was a brawl from 1790 to 1791, and a large part of this brawl is saying that Mozart and his friends are French Republican radicals, and they're out to overthrow the Austrian, emperor. And that's a whole deeper story, and the magic flute comes up in the process of that. But unfortunately, Count Peregrine gets put back in, and if you looking for a case of an Austrian emperor being pulled, what happens in short order is in the fall of 1791, Baron von Swieten, who's in charge of the education of the next prince, of the next emperor, Franz II. Franz II is not a good guy, but that part of the court still has the upper hand. He is fired on December 5th, the same day that Mozart is killed, dies. The Emperor Leopold II dies under very suspicious circumstances before the winter is over in early 1792. So the December to what happens from 1792 onwards is what I told you about this Emperor Franz II. In 1794, 1795, they are putting on trial and executing not just constitutional monarchist scholars who simply were in Joseph II's court. They were simply people who argued that a monarchy is a good thing and we should have a constitution. It was similar to what I had said earlier last week on the constitutional monarchist around Lafayette, who wanted a monarchy. They were also constitutional Republicans. But they were executing these people in 1794, 1795. They were stuffing Mozart's friend. His name was Angelo Soliman, just came to me. This African-American chess player, part of the lodge. He spent the next 50 years as a mummy on display in Franz II's museum. He made a point of that, you know. So that's more than you probably needed, but it's
well, it's reflected in the mummification or the taxidermization of the Arctic Indians that were brought back by Robert Byrd to the Museum of Natural History in the 1930s, and they were brought back alive. But then, of course, they died. They couldn't survive in New York, and they died, and then the Museum of Natural History in New York had them on display. I think I might have seen them when I was a kid going on that school trip up to the, to see the Museum of Natural History. I don't know if I saw them or whether the teachers said that they used to be there and they're not there anymore, but that was creepy, stuffing human beings for display. I
had the same memory problem. I'm convinced I saw it, but I'm not sure whether I saw pictures of them. And I don't know for a fact they were there when we were in school or not.
Well, the hour has flown by on us here. Thanks so much for your great introduction to the court of Joseph II, Vienna, in the time of the American Revolution, and the fact that the people of Europe were looking across the ocean to see if we could do it, to see if we could get free of the empire, and certainly hoping that they themselves would be free of their empire at some point in the future. And then the pendulum swings back and forth, and after that explosion of freedom and the expression of free will under Joseph II, with Mozart's great, incredible opera, The Abduction from the Seraglio, we had a burst of freedom, and then it got quashed, as you've explained. But nevertheless, the history is there. It's there for us to savor if we take the time and do the work to study as you have. We're very grateful.
Savor, I'll just add, for tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock.
Yeah, let's
that
talk
was
about
a moment in history that could have gone, like following the Berlin Wall and other moments.
Yeah.
People should not be cynical about what could have happened. And Helga LaRousse thinks that this situation with Afghanistan, as bizarre, as hopeless as it seems on all levels, has that same quality of what Mozart did with the Abduction from the Seraglio. So you won't hear singing tomorrow, I don't think, but hopefully you'll hear something very similar.
10 o'clock tomorrow morning, the SchillerInstitute.com, and sounds like a winner. I'm very excited about the ideas. I follow Helga on Twitter, and they're very, very active, the Schiller folks, pushing the idea of Afghanistan being, as it says here, a turning point in history. And we certainly wish everyone good success tomorrow at the seminar. Thanks again, David, and thanks, Andy Stabala, for the production tonight. It's been a pleasure, and we'll see you again sometime soon, I hope, David. Thank you.
John, Andy, thank you. It's a pleasure.
All right.